Are you guys wearing your menstrual hygiene bracelets?
Mine didn't come in the mail yet. No. But Andrew, you got dressed up for the CBC, but didn't want to get dressed up for us here at Off the Record?
No, I didn't pack enough because I'm on the road, and I was originally just planning on being home today, so I didn't pack enough nice clothes to get me through this taping. So you're lucky I'm wearing even a shirt with a collar.
Yeah, we'll take that. We're trying to run a serious operation here, though. You know.
Oh, it's funny. I don't usually wear ties at home, but because it's weird when you're doing a remote interview. I'm because it's just who wears a suit at home in their basement, but it's also television. So I don't know. Very, very difficult conundrum. I don't think I've ever seen you in a tie, William.
I mean, when I worked in government, I wore a tie every day, and there was something just awful about getting up at 5 a.m. and, getting into a suit and tie and having to wear it for 18 hours consecutively. And now that I don't have to, I choose not to most of the time.
I think in general, there's just something awful about having to get up at 5 a.m.
Yeah, that was not a great part.
You can now follow the Liberal lead with bow ties and sneakers in the house. Yeah. So if they're wearing bow ties and sneakers, the staff can probably get away with t-shirt and shorts.
I think we're leading with that one anyway. So all right, let's get this started. Hello and welcome to you all. This is another edition of Off the Record on True North. It is Friday, May 31st, the end of the month of May, which is a fact that is of zero relevance, except that I just noticed it by looking at the calendar a moment before we began. I am Andrew Lawton, joined by Harrison Faulkner and William McBeath. We are going to kick at the week that was in news and have a little fun in the process. But again, happy Friday to you both, Harrison and William. What did you get up to this week?
Well, not much. It's been a bit quiet. It's been a quieter week for me. I wasn't showing up at student protests in Charlottetown and, poking around, asking questions. It was remarkably quiet, I have to say.
Yeah, and by comparison, my weeks are never as interesting as yours and Harrison, so I really don't have a lot to add at this point.
I would like it noted that I had book launch events in both Calgary and Toronto this week, and neither of you came to either of them, but that's okay.
I have bought your book, Andrew. I'm waiting for Amazon to deliver it into my hot little hands so I can read it.
Okay, that's fine. You're forgiven then. All right. Well, this is, speaking of interesting, this is a Liberal politician, so that probably wasn't a good segue. But it is interesting that the Liberals have a rather strange belief about a beloved family pastime, which is the Great Canadian Road Trip. So just to set the stage here, the Conservatives are trying to get the Liberals to offer a bit of a reprieve on the carbon tax. They've been trying this for several months. It's not working. The Liberals have just decided to go all in on this. They've not just backed the carbon tax, but they've continued to back increases to it. The Conservatives decided they'll have one just Hail Mary. Will the Liberals give Canadians a summer break on the tax on fuel? This is what Rachel Thomas, who's a Conservative member of Parliament, tried to get a bit of a commitment from the government on in question period this week.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the hunger and homelessness that it's causing so many Canadians across this country. Many Canadians just simply look forward to a small summer vacation, a road trip perhaps. It's normally a time where they can go and camp in the mountains or go to a national park or visit loved ones. But this year, many Canadians can't afford this simple delight because this government has made life too expensive. On Monday, this House will have the opportunity to vote on a common sense motion to save Canadians 35 cents per litre on gas. Will the Prime Minister vote with us, the common sense Conservatives, so that Canadians can afford a simple vacation, or will he force them to stay home?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, good news, kids. You can take a summer fun time vacation where you're locked in a car for 10 consecutive days, nonstop with no bathroom breaks, and the Conservatives have a plan for you to have that summertime fun. And the cost? Give up the future of the planet, right? Don't worry, kids, about climate change. Don't worry about taking action on the planet. Enjoy your 10 hours in the car and let the planet burn.
So that was Mark Holland, the health minister, who there's a lot to unpack there. Number one, I don't believe that every man is the image I take of the guy wearing a bow tie talking about the ordinary Canadian family vacation. Number two, I don't know if he's doing it right, if he keeps his kids locked in the car for 10 days without letting them use the bathroom, I feel that's actually a violation of the Geneva Convention. And also the idea that the planet is burning without the Liberal carbon tax, I find a little bit frustrating. I don't know. Harrison, what's your take on this one?
Well, my first take on it was that Mark Holland must have had some really bad road trips when he was growing up. It's like some nightmare was just, like brought into his head. He heard road trip and he had that awful reminder of what his childhood road trips were like. His parents must have been, they must have been the ones keeping him in the car for 10 days straight, no bathroom breaks. Just the horror. I don't understand what he's trying to say here, right? Like, is he saying that, kids are going to sit in the car and the Conservatives aren't going to do anything for the planet, or that the actual road trip is burning the planet? The best part about this was the reaction from the Liberals around him. The second that he just starts piping up about the road trip, you can see Seamus O'Regan look up and just not react at all. There's no clapping. He's just shocked at what's going on here.
Yeah.
This is not the attack that we planned before, Mark. Come on, figure it out.
Well,
just so absurd.
Newfoundland. So his province is where families take their road trips too.
Right.
William,
absurd.
did you get the point out of this? I feel like he was trying to do too much with that 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, tell me you're completely out of touch with the economic reality of most Canadians without directly saying so. A lot of Canadians choose road trips because they're an affordable way to go on vacation. And if you think about it, if you've got a mom and a dad and 3 kids, you might, just to get from one half of the country to the other, be paying $3,000 or $4,000 in airfare. And that's not something that a lot of people can just drop easily. I suppose for many of the Liberals who are used to vacationing on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Greek islands, or on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, then a road trip might seem distasteful or something to be ridiculed. But for a lot of Canadian families, the summer road trip is what they look forward to during the year. They work hard, they pay their Liberal taxes, many, many taxes. And with the little money they have left, they go on a road trip vacation, they go camping, they go to the Okanagan in BC, they go look at some of the beautiful places that are in Canada. And of course, you've just seen that the government thinks you are contemptuous or contemptible if you indulge in this particular Canadian pastime.
Yeah, and the weird thing too, so he's doing 2 things. He's saying that this is this horrific assault on the climate, which is bizarre in a way because it's far less carbon intensive to load 4 people in one car than it is to fly an airplane. So that's one thing there. And also, he's just taking aim at the pastime itself, taking aim at the vacation. It's one thing to say this is a thing I would never do with your kids. Great. I don't think your kids want to be in a car with you, Mark Holland, if that's how you behave.
No.
I think the Liberals just gave the Conservatives an ad for the entire summer, right? They're going to they should just roll this as much as they can all throughout the summer. They've just given them such great ammunition here, such an obvious example of Liberal elitism and looking down on average Canadians. It's pathetic. It's unbelievable. And it kind of goes to this whole thing we've been seeing, this trend we're seeing from the Liberals, which is they just seem to be out of all arguments. They have nothing really to say anymore. And they're flailing, they're grasping at straws, and then they're kind of, they're reacting on the fly. This is like improv for them right now. And Mark is suffering from a lack of skills in that department. This is what they can do, thinking on the fly. It's quite a big indictment of what these guys are able to do when they actually have something important to do, like governing this country.
I was also thinking just a moment ago of when the Liberals launched their campaign bus for 2025, the election. It's this is just going to be some big giant Liberal road trip. So, all of a sudden now road trips are good if they're a cross-country tour, although maybe Trudeau won't be inviting Mark Holland on the tour bus if, it means 10 days with no bathroom breaks.
Well, I seem to recall in the last election, didn't the Liberal campaign have 2 planes? One for...
I think that was 2019. I think that was 2019 campaign.
One for Liberal MPs or Liberal staffers and one for their luggage. So, if we're really going to talk about who's got the worst impact on the carbon, a Canadian family of 4 taking a camping or road trip vacation, or the Liberal Prime Minister who needs a whole separate plane for his luggage, I think that they have to bear the responsibility for harming the climate themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because we haven't actually talked about the underlying claim of Mark Holland's thing, which is that the Liberal carbon tax is preventing the planet from burning. The emissions have gone up for the entirety of the time that the Liberal carbon tax has been in effect. And by the way, the wildfires have not been caused by the absence of a carbon tax. They've been overwhelmingly caused by arson.
Well, Andrew, you know, when you say that, we're gonna get who is it? Press Progress, Anti-Hate. They'll start chiming in. We'll get 2 new viewers on Off the Record, because the second we start talking about wildfires, that's when they start showing up. Don't be careful there. We don't want to go into any conspiracy theory territory with that.
We'll also get on you. I suspect if you're watching on YouTube, look under the video. I suspect right now there's a United Nations climate change PSA. Every time you mention the carbon tax, you get like the link to like the UN. It was either the WHO or the UN. One of them on any episode is there, and just
the keyword is just climate change. If you say it, once or maybe twice, nice and clear, climate change.
Yeah.
Now it should show up, no problem.
William's still mad that I got us banned from YouTube for interviewing the My Pillow guy, who's I don't even want to say his name now, because that I think that gets you an automatic strike on YouTube.
The pillow man who shall not be
warning, by the way.
Yeah, what was that, Harrison?
We're still carrying that warning on our channel.
Yeah. Is it still there? Okay,
it's still there, and it's
all right.
You hit the button and it says your video in June 20th of 2021. We're still going to hold it against you. We're still punishing you for it.
Should have never wanted to do an episode about pillows. All right, so I think we can move on from Mark Holland and his road trip here. This is a bit more of a serious story, but I think there's an underlying point that we need to hammer here on the media that has been particularly relevant this week. William, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I assume, Andrew, you're referring to the recent stories we had around the 3-year anniversary of the residential schools announcement from Kamloops. And it is an interesting story. It's interesting how much the world has changed in the intervening years. So when this first came out, when there was an announcement by the Kamloops Indigenous tribes there that they had found 215 unmarked graves, and they believed it would be for the bodies of missing children, the entire Canadian press, in fact, the entire world press, collectively lost their minds. And they talked about how this was a mass grave, to use the terminology of the New York Times. They talked about genocide. Well, True North was really the only media company out there who actually said, wait a minute, what do these ground penetrating radar surveys actually show? Are these in fact graves? And to the point where we were very proud to have published a book about this issue that tried to take some of the emotion out of the argument. Very slowly, legacy media changed how they covered it. Well, except for, as it turns out, the good people of City News Vancouver, who once again repeated the claim that there were 215 unmarked graves located at the site of the former Indian residential school in Kamloops. Thankfully, there was a lot of pushback on X. You saw readers say, wait a minute, that's not true. There's been zero evidence that there are any graves. There have been no excavations. No bodies have been found, let alone of children. Why are you propagating this myth? And City News did a quiet little edit job. They removed the claim of graves. They said purported, I believe is the word they put in, purported graves. And they took the author's by name off the article, and they just said it was written by news staff. So that's always a sign that maybe you're not the most certain about your story when you take the individual reporter's name off and say it was some unknown anonymous news staff who wrote it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd point out too is that the Kamloops band actually itself has walked back the claim. They used to say that there was the discovery of bodies of children, and now they say they were anomalies. And again, that's a very key distinction. The New York Times was, I think, probably the most irresponsible in its coverage, because a mass grave means something very specific. A mass grave refers to a mass casualty event in which, the 215 purportedly children were killed. And I think in general, I had not, to be perfectly frank, before 3 years ago, heard of ground penetrating radar. I knew it existed, but I didn't know what it was. And it was presented, and again, I think a lot of this was the media, not the Kamloops band, presented as being far more specific and powerful than it actually was. And people were told, oh, wow, ground penetrating radar. And I think everyone was imagining it was like the airport body scanners, where you just look at it and you just see in perfect detail everything that's there. And then you realize as you learn about about this, that it doesn't distinguish between rocks and bones and other disturbances or anomalies here. And, the media has, I think, changed its coverage on this. But Harrison, have you seen anything in the way of corrections, retractions, the media saying, hey, maybe we got this wrong?
Well, I don't think they'll ever actually say that. If they do get caught, they'll do what City News Vancouver did, which was make that quiet edit. First, it was an editor's note. Then they took the poor writer's name off the article so she wouldn't suffer any abuse on social media. And then they just took the entire tweet down. You brought up the New York Times, and the New York Times has the article up. The headline still reads, "Mass grave of Indigenous children reported in Canada."
Oh, does it really? They haven't changed that?
Nope. And they have an editor's note, but they don't actually have an editor's note that corrects the headline. They have an editor's note, which they made, but it doesn't actually change the headline of the article. So that just goes to show you the media are completely in line with this. They played a major role in propagating this myth, this anti-Canadian myth that caused so much damage to our country and a real dark period in our country, which didn't have to be the case. Let's look at the way let's look at the way X played a role in this, though, with City News Vancouver. They were the ones that put up the community note, the fact check, which resulted in the article being taken down from Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Imagine if we had a legitimate community notes service back in 2021 when these claims first came out. We could have saved ourselves the 6 months of national flagellation. It would have been remarkably different had that actually happened. I have to bring this up, though, because that same news outlet, City News Vancouver, they invited BC Regional Assembly of First Nations Chief Terry Teague on to discuss this 3-year anniversary. They never pushed back on the claims. They still went along with the discovery of mass graves, reported mass graves, children buried in these findings. And then, when asked another question for a follow-up, the chief justified why there had not been any bones found in any of these claims by saying some of these schools had incinerators. So he's making the accusation that these schools just burned the evidence, burned the bodies so that we can never find them. It is remarkable that there are some people who are still trying to push this myth, with which I find actually quite harmful to First Nations Canadians, because the longer this goes on and the longer that a lot of these communities are still pushing this message, well, Canadians aren't going to believe the actual problems that still face First Nations communities today. It does them a big disservice when you have chiefs like this talking complete nonsense without backing it up at all.
Yeah, look, I've studied history. I love Canadian history, and history has always been about studying the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I do not take the view that the residential schools had a net positive, but I do take the view that they were things that, again, it's so difficult to even talk about. I take the view that the motivations and the outcomes were different. And that tends to be the issue here when people try to look back in history and project with modern sensibilities what had happened there. But there has still not been any evidence of these many, many claims. And it wasn't just Kamloops, because Kamloops started a wave of these claims. And there has never been any support for these so-called discoveries. And that's, I find, what is most concerning here, and that there hasn't even really been a desire to inquire about it, a desire to excavate and do all the other things that you would do if there were some mass criminality that had occurred.
Yeah, I mean, here we are 3 years later with none of these questions answered. There have been no publicly released excavations. There has been no evidence presented by the Indigenous groups who have engaged in exploratory work, and the claims for why that is have varied. Look, overall, none of us believe, I think, that residential schools had a positive outcome. There were a lot of really terrible things that occurred at them, and people did suffer. But why diminish that suffering and that pain by inventing falsehoods around things that never did happen? And, in Grave Air, a book, again, that True North published, we go into some detail talking about what those soil disturbances could have been. Everything from the fact that there was an apple orchard there was irrigation done, there were pits and trenches dug to do renovation work. And, instead of focusing on atrocities that are unprovable and likely did not occur, why don't we focus on healing and coming back from the incidents that we are aware of, the pain that we know that happened? So the fact that the media glommed onto it the way they did in an almost, they almost seem to be, maybe not happy, but the fact that they glommed on so hard and put so much emphasis on this story, I think is a real disservice, both to Canada as a whole and to our First Nations. And
before we move on to the next story, it's important to make sure that this story, these claims, were directly linked to 100 churches being burned down. And look at the way the media treated the claims made by these First Nations bands versus the claims that were being made, versus the evidence and the picture evidence of churches being burned without really trying to investigate who the people were that are behind these burnings. It is completely ridiculous that this story, which resulted in so much damage to Christians in this country, has been treated basically as though it doesn't matter. And you can make these claims. We don't need to really investigate them. We don't need to admit that we made a huge mistake. We can quietly correct our errors or not correct them at all, like in the case of New York Times. While that exact same kind of reporting, that lazy reporting, the politicians who ran with it, directly played a role in burning down 100 churches. It is remarkable.
And I forget, did Justin Trudeau ever comment on the church burning?
I think he did once or twice.
But certainly not with the speed that, vandalism of a mosque comes from, or anything to do with the residential school announcements.
No, and I don't think he took a knee with a teddy bear outside of a burned church as well, like he did in the case of the Kamloops situation.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. And then you had, the burn it all down woman in British Columbia. Sean has asked, didn't he say he understood? I think that was Jerry Butts. Wasn't it Jerry Butts that said he understood why people would do it? I might be wrong about that, but no, there was a lot of equivocation about it. And that was, I think, the key point. It was that, apparently Trudeau did say that. Yeah. So all of a sudden it's about trying to be sympathetic to the church burners. That's the way we do this. Absolutely insane. What else do we have going on here? Oh, yes. Well, we couldn't, yes, the announcement in Kamloops, that was an anniversary this week, but we have to honor every day on the calendar. And I must admit, I missed this one. But it was Menstrual Hygiene Day this week. Now, you may think, well, don't worry, Andrew, you probably didn't pay attention because you're a man, but that doesn't mean anything in this day and age. Everyone knows men can menstruate, women can menstruate. They might as well start calling it menstruation. But we had a lot of lecturing from Liberal MPs about Menstrual Hygiene Day. Seamus O'Regan, the minister who was unimpressed by Mark Holland, he has his menstrual hygiene bracelet on there, which I didn't know exists. He said, people don't bring their own toilet paper to work, so they shouldn't have to bring their own pads and tampons. We changed that. We put free menstrual products in federally regulated workplace. This bracelet is for Menstrual Hygiene Day. Then we have Marcy Ian, the Liberal cabinet minister as well. Periods are a fact of life. Everyone deserves access to affordable menstrual products. Thanks to the Menstrual Equity Fund, over 3 million people across Canada have been able to access this basic need. Ahmed Hassan, the menstrual hygiene observer, says he's committed to a future where women and girls who menstruate can realize their full potential. Wow, it's a barrier for your full potential. And then we have Terry Beach, the Liberal member of Parliament, who decided to give us the full PSA treatment on this.
Hi everyone, Terry Beach, your member of Parliament for Burnaby North Seymour. This bracelet commemorates May 28th, which is Menstrual Hygiene Day. Now, there are millions of women around the world who are unable to reach their full potential simply because they menstruate. And so this day is about reducing the stigma. As a father of two young girls, I want to make sure that they, along with billions of girls and women around the world, have an equal opportunity that everybody else has. It's also a massive affordability issue. And that's why in all federal workplaces, menstrual products are now available for free. In fact, if you come into my constituency office and use the washroom, you will see that menstrual products are available there as well. So let's end the stigma and commemorate the day and build a better world for our women here in Canada, but also right around the world.
What was it you said about that video, William?
Well, I jokingly said he was manspreading and mansplaining menstruation to women, because who better than a bunch of men MPs to talk about an issue that, frankly, doesn't directly affect them. It's not something that, well, and to be politically correct, it doesn't affect the overwhelming majority of men. You know, I would say possibly people should take Mr. Beach up on his offer. I'd like to see every woman in a 100-kilometer radius who needs any form of menstruation product go to Mr. Beach's office, demand that they be given their free products. And if he runs out, I say that's just a sign of how much he doesn't support women who face this. So I would encourage the tens of thousands of women who live around that area to make sure they only get their products to Mr. Beach's office going forward.
It's the epitome of the straw man, which is like you set up a thing, you set up a bogeyman to attack, but no one has actually made the point, is that all of these Liberal MPs, it was insanely coordinated, were tweeting about this stigma that doesn't exist. And they're saying we need to break down the stigma. And what stigma? Like people, like this is a bodily function. There's no one that's embarrassed by this discussion. You know, women can get tampons now in men's washrooms on Parliament Hill. Like you can get them anywhere you want. So it was like weird. And then it was women that were like complaining on X and on Facebook about this. Like why do I need these men to tell me it's okay for me to talk about periods?
Yeah, they're like they're making the stigma by making these videos. This is the same government that puts tampons in male washrooms in the military, right? On every single military base in this country. I looked at the Terry Beach video and my first reaction to it was that this was some sort of humiliation ritual, right? I didn't see any other male Liberal MPs making a video except for Terry Beach. Terry is, for all intents and purposes, a no-name backbench Liberal MP. He doesn't really qualify to be some sort of cabinet minister. He doesn't really tick off any of the diversity points. So they basically said, we're going to have you make this video and it's going to be the most embarrassing thing you've ever produced and you'll have to live with it for the rest of your life. It'll be out there for you. Now, that was my read on it. They picked the one guy who, you know, had to do the humiliation ritual. If you're going to wear the period bracelet, if Terry Beach is going to wear this period bracelet because he needs to end the stigma around the world for women and girls, well, why would you take? He should wear that the entire year. If he really cares about this, cares enough to make a video about it, like Ahmed Hassan as well, they should keep that bracelet on all the time. Otherwise, it's just you know, they don't care about it. Let's make it like a mark of shame. You know, if you're going to be that weird, you have to wear this bracelet everywhere so people can know that you're just that creepy. And that you're willing to talk about menstruation like that.
Can you put up the Seamus O'Regan graphic again, Sean? I should explain the symbolism. So apparently it's got 28 beads and 5 red ones. The 5 red ones are supposed to honor the 5 days in a 28-day period that women are menstruating. And I had one woman tell me, well, this is actually offensive to women who, you know, menstruate for 6 or 7 days, which is getting into a level of specificity I will confess to not be an expert in. But the thing that I find interesting about this is that, like, what other bodily functions do we need a bracelet for? Like, do we get like the brown diarrhea awareness bracelet? Do we do the, you know, a yellow one? Do we do like a dark yellow one when you're not hydrated enough and your urine is coming a little dark? Like what? How many bodily fluids need their own commemorative bracelets is the question. You know,
they sold a lot of these bracelets, and I'm wondering if maybe a wife or a husband of a Liberal member of Parliament is manufacturing these bracelets, and they're somehow managing to get a workaround and finding a way to make some money off this.
Well, Terry Beach said he had a daughter. Yeah, Terry Beach had 2 daughters, so maybe one of his daughters had just started doing beading, and he realized that, you know, screw Girl Guide cookies, we can make a lot of money just selling like every Liberal member of Parliament a menstrual hygiene bracelet.
It is, you know, a case of just such crass politics where the Liberal government, who is so bereft of policy solutions and anything to talk about, that they are trying to pick the few issues where they think they still have some sort of political advantage. You think back to, you know, last week where they were once again railing about abortion. You know, you've now got gun control back on the agenda with a plan to have Canada Post be part of taking guns off the streets. They can barely get mail in mailboxes, so I don't know how they expect to be able to get guns off streets. And now you've got this. And the fact is, people can't afford groceries. They can't afford gas. They can't afford their rents. They can't afford to buy houses. I don't think anybody's going to go into the next election and say, oh, but don't worry, I'm voting for the party that's good on menstruation.
Yeah, that's I'm not allowed to take a road trip, and actually, maybe how Mark Holland is not being menstrually aware if he's keeping kids in his car for 10 days. You never know. Maybe this is all. So here's the segue we'll find. Maybe this is an example of men undergoing the behavioral change that they're seeking in Australia. Why don't you take it away, Harrison?
Yes, so there is a new cabinet post in the province of Victoria in Australia, which is now for men's behavior change. It is now an official cabinet post, Australia's first minister of men's behavior change, in an attempt to try to stop domestic violence and a recent rise in the killing of women in Victoria. They somehow think that this is going to really solve this problem. The problem is, when they announced this position, the entire world mocked them for it, and they probably pushed back the objectives of this ministry by like 5 or 6 years just by announcing the ministry itself, because everybody thinks it's a complete joke. 3.6 thousand replies. This is the ratio here, so we're going back to my bread and butter. Let me just address the ratio here on this guy's tweet. Tim Richardson, he's the new men's behavior change minister. 3.6 thousand replies to 724 likes. He has been getting absolutely destroyed in the comments, and rightly so. I'm not quite sure what they intend to achieve here by creating this position. It's like, this is there's a problem, and they've created a cabinet post which won't do anything at all, but it'll make them appear like they're taking it seriously. It really is remarkable. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think domestic violence is atrocious, and I think it's very serious, and I know Australia has had a problem with it. And the way you deal with that is certainly by enforcing the law, and I think there are ways that you can instill education and all of these things. And even if the core of the problem is that you need to get certain men to change their behaviors, the way that this has been criticized is that you're basically saying that all men are the problem and that all men need to do this. And it really, when people were looking at the headline, a lot of people didn't even know it was about domestic violence. They thought it was like this woke crusade against toxic masculinity, like the Gillette ads a couple of years ago. So when people just inherently tune out, it means that you've missed your mark.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Margaret Thatcher's approach that, rarely does putting a minister in charge of a problem actually fix it. In fact, it's a pretty sure way of guaranteeing there'll always be a problem, especially if a minister's job depends on the problem keeping existing. But no, you're absolutely right that, the problem of domestic violence is huge, and made worse, by the way, when we allow biological males to enter women's spaces, women's shelters, and things like that, which the progressives have said is it's intolerant to try and discriminate against these people from using those facilities. But ultimately, being tougher on the crime of domestic violence, having real sentences, real consequences for engaging in, is one of the ways we ensure it isn't repeated by those who are repeat offenders. So you think back in Canada, where the policy is to get arrested, and within 24 hours, we make sure you're back on the street, able to reoffend again. Well, of course, we're going to see repeat offenders in areas like domestic violence. We're going to see these people who have beaten one woman beat another woman. So the key is to not let them back on the street where they're beating women.
Andrew, do you remember the story of in London when Sadiq Khan made this campaign, and it was called the Mate campaign, Say Mate, to try to stop domestic violence and harassing women on the street? I have a feeling that this position here, as we've discussed, is not going to do anything to fix the situation, but they're just going to come up with new campaigns like it probably will be like Say Mate, crikey whenever you see something bad. Like, they're going to come up with some nonsense graphics and campaigns that aren't going to do anything.
Yeah, it's going to be a PSA. And at a certain point, you're talking about a violence issue. You're talking about a justice issue. You have to look at the underlying causes. But the people that are causing these problems are not going to be like, well, I don't know, that Aussie bloke on TV told me I need to change my behavior. So, everything's good now. Thank you.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And what rules what rules are in place that are not being enforced when it comes to this stuff? Are they going to create more laws about this stuff? I'm sure that domestic violence is against the law, and abuse of your spouse is against the law in Australia. So why can't they just enforce the laws?
Well, and one of the challenges in this discussion is that, like, the way you protect women is by giving them spaces to go. You give them shelters to go to. You fund those shelters, and there's a contingent of the population that says, "Well, hang on, that's missing the point. We need to get men to stop abusing women." Well, yeah, but you also need to provide women opportunities to get out of these situations. And I don't know the state of the shelter system in Australia. I think your point, William, is very valid. Making sure these shelters actually stay as safe spaces for women.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are more things that can be done, and I would hope that I don't like to argue for higher government spending because I think so many of our tax dollars are badly spent, but funding things that have a material impact on helping women be safer and to have places where they can go, systems that allow them to more easily report domestic violence, have it investigated, and not result in women who do leave their husbands being, in abject poverty or something like that, I think are all valid. But certainly the idea that we're going to treat all men as the problem, I think just starts off on the foot of making most men feel unreceptive to any form of the changes that the government might suggest. You don't like being told that you're a problem or that because of something you can't control, that you are suspect. And then certainly the terrible people who engage in domestic violence are very rarely receptive to public service announcements. It's the same way that the gun registry didn't reduce illegal gun crime, because if you're willing to steal a firearm and murder someone with it, you're probably willing not to fill out the government form to register your weapons. So it makes about as much sense as the gun registry, which is why the gun registry was not widely popular here in Canada.
Indeed. All right, we will close things out on a self-indulgent note on my part. So as I've talked about on my show, my new book came out this week, Pierre Poilievre, A Political Life. It's a banger of a biography about the Conservative Party of Canada leader, and I've been very grateful that there's been a tremendous amount of interest from the media. I was on my colleague Rachel Emmanuel's show. I've been interviewed on newspapers, radio, podcasting, and even, don't hold it against me, CBC. CBC's Power and Politics with David Cochrane very kindly had me on for a relatively long interview, and I spoke about my experiences writing the book and some of the conclusions I've taken away, and had a nice chat with David Cochrane. Well, this has been converted into a liberal attack ad, believe it or not. Take a look.
How aggressive do you think he will be should he win?
I mean, one friend of his that I quote in the book, Adam Daifala, predicts a Mike Harris first term.
Just a year into its mandate, the Harris government began implementing a series of drastic reforms in the
I like the scary
sector.
music.
Operating budgets were cut by almost $1.3 billion. The result, a lot of staff lost their jobs.
Mike Harris seems determined to tell the people of Ontario that it's business as usual, that the government is determined to carry on with its deficit-slashing, tax-cutting agenda.
But what I remember are all the cuts and deregulation. And of course I remember Walkerton.
In Walkerton, 7 people died and thousands became sick when E. coli bacteria entered the local water system. A judicial review found cuts to the Ministry of Environment were partly to blame.
Predicts a Mike Harris first term.
Now, by the way, you may recall, just to go back a couple of years, CBC sued the Conservatives for using CBC footage in an ad. So I don't know if the CBC is going to sue the Liberals for using their footage in this one. I find this just hilarious. I mean, now I've had the privilege of starring in 2 attack ads. I was in a Conservative attack ad against the PPC once, and I've now been in a Liberal attack ad. So I just need Jagmeet Singh to, pluck me in an ad, and then I'll have the trifecta. But William, what's your take on this? I mean, because you were actually around when Mike Harris was, this very popular figure in the Conservative movement.
Yeah, I mean, my political background means I do love a good attack ad. Nobody likes to watch them, but I do. I have a cache of them on my computer that I sometimes rewatch for nostalgia's sake. But I think one of the problems with this ad is something you just hit on, where a huge number of people are going to watch that and go, right, and who's Mike Harris? Because he hasn't been premier in a long, long time. And the fact that they're having to go back that far just shows that they...
it was literally 29 years. 29 years since he was elected.
30 years. And, so people who who were 18 or 20 are now going to be 50 to remember it. And so I don't know. To me, it shows that they're on pretty thin ice, that the fact that you have to reference something 30 years ago in order to try and make an attack ad shows that the well is pretty dry when it comes to attack ads. That being said, I'm sure that the 10 or 12 people who watch David Cochrane's Power and Politics show will be absolutely outraged by the comparison to Mike Harris.
Well, I hear, massive cuts to a bloated government. I feel like that sounds like a pretty good time. I feel like I missed a good time back then. I wish I was around to enjoy it in Ontario. We could certainly do with that now. I found it interesting, Andrew, at the beginning of the interview you had with David Cochrane, he made the point that he said, I wonder what the True North audience is thinking having you join us on CBC, and the CBC audience is going to freak out having the dangerous conservative Andrew Lawton on CBC. I don't think the True North audience actually was too upset that you were on CBC.
No, everyone's like, "Oh, great, good for you." Yeah.
What I think they would like us to see, I'd like to see us go on CBC and challenge them face to face more often. Like if we were on CBC, they invited us, we could have some debates with them. That would make for some great content. It might actually increase the views of the CBC as well. It's a win-win, the way I see it.
So I was also, when was it? I think it was I recorded it on Sunday and it came out on Tuesday. I was on Peter Mansbridge's podcast. So Peter Mansbridge, the longtime CBC guy, has a podcast now. And we had a very lovely chat. He had me on for, I think it was like 40 minutes or so. And oh my goodness, his audience has not forgiven him. You want to see a ratio, Harrison?
I've seen the comments.
Look at the tweet from Peter Mansbridge announcing that I was on his show. I feel bad for the guy because he's thinking, oh, great, I'm going to reach across the aisle and talk to this conservative author and show that I'm a fair newsman. And now his people are like, I'm unsubscribing. How dare you have Andrew Lawton on? It was even more unhinged than the CBC audience.
Don't you think that says something, though, that our audience would be super pumped when we get to go on these? Like, obviously the interview you had with Mansbridge wasn't a confrontational interview, but had it been the sort of thing where they wanted to challenge us on certain issues, I think our audience, the conservative audience, they'd be like super up for it. They'd tune in, they'd be super into it. And the current audience on these legacy media platforms, those that are hanging on to the podcasts of Peter Mansbridge, and the CBC, they can't even handle that. They don't want the platform to be given. They don't even want to be pushed back on the ideas. They don't want to be exposed to new ideas. It says a lot.
Yeah, it happened when my Convoy book came out 2 years ago. I went on Justin Ling's podcast, who's I'd say a left-wing journalist. I don't think he would reject that description. And we had a great chat. He had me on and was one of the only non-right-leaning people to interview me for that book. And then I had him on my show about something else around the same time. And exactly what you just described there happened, Harrison, where his audience, a lot of them were like, how dare you platform this Andrew Lawton guy? And my audience was like, well, I don't like Justin Ling, but that was a good chat. Or, oh, I'm glad you had him on. People actually appreciated that dialogue. And I think that's one of the profound differences between the left and the right. And it's why the free speech fight is so important, because we want to engage in the debate. A lot of them want to shut down the debate.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting comparison to even today's the issue of Palestinian protests and the fact that there are groups out there trying to deplatform anybody who has any association with Israel or anyone who has dared to be associated with a Jewish person. I think I read an article that said in Chicago there was a list of a group chat or a conversation amongst therapists, and they said, well, who here could treat a Zionist with who's having mental issues? And anybody who responded to that group chat saying they got put on a list of these are the Zionist supporters in our ranks. And the idea that if you disagree with someone politically, they're not just wrong, but they're evil and they need to be removed. And frankly, a lot of them think killed. I think is the intolerance of the progressive left that is now really showing its face in things. And I think most recently in the ongoing protests regarding Palestine and the Hamas attacks of October 7th.
Yeah, very well said. All right, well, that does it for us for another Off the Record. Thanks to Harrison Faulkner and William McBeath, as always, for your contributions. I'm Andrew Lawton. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. He cut me off before I did the tagline. I was supposed to say, and everything was off the record. Oh, well.
I'm waiting for my invitation to join Rosie Barton's Sunday panel so I can go head-to-head with Andrew Coyne. When are they going to give me my invitation? When are they going to let me loose?
Sean's now fighting me. He says that was a clear cue. Well, okay, yes. In fairness, I had forgotten to do it, but I had remembered, and then the outro was going, and oh well.